And welcome back. We are going to continue working with variables. Specifically today, we're going to talk about the concepts of increment and decrement. So let's first talk about the increment operator. We've actually already seen the increment operator. It's something that we saw when we looked at our list of different precedences. However, the increment operator is actually very simple and easy to use. It's simply just plus plus. And all it's going to do is add 1 to the current value of a variable. So this is typically done with numeric type. So let's just say I have int n equals 1, and I say, well, let's do n plus plus. Well, it's just simply going to change the value of n from 1 to 2. And that's all it's going to do. It's a very simple operation. Now, there are two different ways that we can increment. There is n plus plus, and all this means is the value will increase after the variable value has been calculated. Or there's plus plus n, where the increase happens before the variable's value is returned. And for today's operations and what we're kind of getting in now, we don't really need to worry about the plus plus n so much as the n plus plus. That'll be the most common one we likely use. But there might be situations in the future where you want to do plus plus n. So for now, though, just focus on the n plus plus because, again, that'll be the more common one we use. If we look at the other side, the decrement operator, you might have already figured out, well, if increment increases, a decrement is going to, if you guess decrease, you're correct, because that's exactly what it does. It is minus minus as our symbol, and it's going to simply decrease the value of the variable by 1. So if I use my example again, if I have int n equals 1, and I say n minus minus, the value of n is going to go from 1 to 0. Again, a very simple operation for us to use. Now, there are two different ways to decrement, just like we had with increment. We can do n minus minus, or we can do minus minus n. Both of these function exactly the same, except one before, instead of doing an increase, it's now doing a decrease. And again, we're probably going to see n minus minus much more commonly than we do minus minus n. Now, there is one other thing to ask ourselves. Why do we have this plus plus or this minus minus? Why do we have this? Because you might be thinking, okay, we're just adding 1. Why is this so special? Because we can just add 1. Or maybe I want to subtract them. Well, can't I just add 1? That's true. N plus plus is the same thing as saying n equals n plus 1. And n minus minus is exactly the same as saying n equals n minus 1. So they are the same thing. So you might be wondering, well, why, other than maybe saving a little bit of code? Well, the most common reason why is for something known as a loop. Loops, a lot of times, are used increment or decrement statements to change their iterations. This is how they advance to the next cycle of loop. Others, they just kind of repeat the same set of instructions over and over again. And even though we aren't yet at loops, this is kind of more the reasoning why. So we're going to put that terminology in your head that, we can use plus plus and minus minus, so we won't have to see them for the first time when we get to using loops. And the other thing I want you to know with plus plus and minus minus is they are really helpful because Java doesn't allow us to use arithmetic operations in loop conditions. So I cannot go into a loop and say, hey, I want you to do n equals n plus 1, or I want you to do n equals n minus 1. Instead, we're going to say, hey, n minus minus n plus plus. This is really especially helpful when we look at what's called a for loop. While loops, it doesn't necessarily affect as much, but when you start looking at a for loop, this is very important here. And again, don't have to worry about that right now because we'll talk about that more when we get to that point. The biggest thing I just want you to know from here is that we do have a use for plus plus and minus minus beyond simply just one more operator. All right, so we're over here in Eclipse now. We are going to go ahead and demonstrate the increment and decrement. The biggest thing, of course, I have two variables. I have num1 equals 10, number1 equals negative 10.5. If I run these, of course, I do get the values I'm expecting, but let's just see how this works when I put in an increment for both of these. So now I've gone ahead and just do a print line of number1 and num1, both with the incrementer. Go ahead and run these, and you can see we get 10 and negative 10.5. Oh, it didn't do anything. That's because in here, it's not actually updating this. All right, it didn't actually change anything. So we can't really use this inside of a print line statement. This is a really good thing for us to know because, we can do sometimes things like this with other ones. Like, for example, if I had this be a num2 and I set this equal to 1, and I did number1 plus number2, we couldn't expect that one to go ahead and change that. But with our increment and decrement operators, you'll notice that those did not change there. The value still came back as expected. So let's just go ahead and add them in here. Num1 plus plus and number1 plus plus. All right. Now, you'll notice we do get an error here, all right? It's saying, I can't resolve this to a variable, all right? It doesn't know, well, because I forgot my number 1. Oh, there we go. That looks better. All right, so now we have our 2 variables set and ready to go. If I go ahead and run this now, you'll see now we get 11 and negative 9.5. So it does work for both integers and doubles, which is great because these are both numeric types. And let's go ahead then, and I'm just going to kind of cheat a little bit here. I'm going to copy and paste this just so we can see this, what it looks like with a decrement. And if we change these back to minus minus here, it should take us back to our original values of 10 and negative 10.5. So I'll go ahead and run this. And of course, we get 10 and negative 10.5. Excellent. So that's a great way for these to work here. Now, one last thing I do want to show, which is related to our increment and decrement. If you remember before, we had kind of some combination operators. Because you notice this is +1, this is -1. You might say, well, is there a way I can get this to like +2 or +3? Well, if you try putting another plus in here, you'll notice we get an error here. All right, and the reason for that is because there's no +++, for example. If I wanted to change this to be something where, let's say I want this to go by 2, I can use my plus equals combination, and you'll notice that that will then be happy. So then, if I run this one, you'll notice you get 12. So plus is simply going to be for 1. Same thing with -1 here with the minus minus. But if I want to do anything larger, that's where these comparison or the combination operators come in with like plus equals, minus equals, and that's how we can set in a different piece here to go ahead and calculate those different pieces. But for the most part, most of the time when we work through these, we're simply going to do plus plus or minus minus, and that should give us a nice good leg up for what we need to do moving forward.